in my workshops, I'd talk about just a simple idea. When you've admitted a new family and resident into your home, that family member drives away probably in tears. And I remember walking
Mhm.
into the kitchen in my home alone, into the kitchen where that was my husband's domain. He was the chef
Mm.
of the house, and feeling incredibly alone. And if someone from the home had called me that night to say, Deb, it's so and so from the home. Ty's fine. He's doing great. But that must have been a really hard day for you. How are you feeling? How are you doing? How can we support you?
Mhm.
That would have made the world of difference that they saw me, they had compassion for me, and would have altered that feeling of being supported.
Welcome to the Bo and Luke Show, a podcast designed to inspire you to be better, know better, and do better. You can connect with Bo and Luke on social media at The Bo and Luke Show, or send us an email at fanfeedback@theboandlukeshow.com. Brought to you by Sound United. Without further ado, let's get after it.
Bo and Luke Nation, welcome to the Bo and Luke Show. I'm your co-host, Luke Carrington. I'm sitting here with Bo Brabo, and we are delighted to have Deb Bakti with us. Deb is a senior care consultant, coach, speaker, and trainer who helps build positive and healthy connections with residents and family in senior care homes. She has a very interesting and unique story that I can't wait for her to share with us. But before starting her own business, she actually worked in senior care for 11 years in operations and human resources. And Bo, I'm sure in HR, you and Deb are going to have a lot to talk about with this.
Mhm.
So she's working to create better, healthier relationships and to be happier in the work that people do every day. Her mission is to help you reset and redesign family relationships so you can restore pleasant and purposeful connections with your new and already established families in their home. And now we're talking about from the home care side here. And I think this is just needed so much. I've, from the staffing side, worked in long-term care, skilled nursing for a long time. So I've seen an interesting aspect of it, but I've never worked directly in there. So, Deb, we're just elated to have you on the show. Welcome.
Well,
Yeah,
thanks for
welcome.
having me.
So, Deb, tell us what sparked this for you. And I think what our listeners would really love to hear about is what inspired you to make this jump to doing this on your own and following your passion and then making this happen. And I got to read a little bit of this, so you have an awesome story behind it. So I'm just going to lob that over there and let you hit it back.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I mean, it was one of those life events that happened. I had been headhunted into working in seniors care. Previous to that, my career was in staffing services. And within a couple of years of working in seniors care, I was leading the home care division at the time. My husband got ill. And it was about a year and a half of going through about 27 different specialists that we got a pretty heartbreaking diagnosis of a disease called Erdheim-Chester. And at the time, we were getting home care, but it became very apparent that he was going to need the services of a long-term care home. And he was younger than what you would typically see in the demographic of residents in long-term care. And so here I was working in the business, understanding seniors care from home care, long-term care, retirement assisted living. And I had been thrown into the role of being a family member. I was now a resident's wife. And it was 4 years that he lived in long-term care before he passed away in April of 2015. During that time, my dad had been diagnosed with Parkinson's and Lewy body dementia, and he also became a resident in long-term care. And there was a period of 3 months where I had my husband living in one long-term care home on one side of the city and my husband living in another.
Mm.
Oh my gosh.
And then the third member of my family that went through the journey with was my mom. And after my dad passed away, we helped her to transition into independent living retirement home. And then her health started failing. So we moved her into assisted living and she passed away in 2019. And it was really the life-changing experience of being a resident's wife and helping my husband being a resident. And the funny thing is, I knew about the business, but I still was blindsided by the emotional impact that the families go through.
Mm.
So I made the decision to retire from my corporate executive job after 11 years working at this organization, to start my own business, because I felt like I wanted to be closer to the front line with frontline staff and equipping them and helping them to be able to better connect with their families and develop that relationship. And I share in both my books about how jarring the admission day experience was for us. We were transactionalized.
Mm-hmm.
We were another busy transaction that needed to be handled in a day. And I'm not pointing fingers and placing blame on the staff, because I understand all of the timing challenges that they have. But part of what I work with my clients is to explain to them and share them through my storytelling that they can have the opportunity to transform that experience and make a solid first impression, because that's where you start building the trust, respect, and partnership with families. And with you look at everything that families have gone through and residents over the last year, in particular with COVID, there is some definite repair and reestablishing and resetting that needs to happen.
Was this to make that jump in? And by the way, I'm terribly sorry for all your losses. Did you view this? I'm curious as to if you viewed this as an easy choice or a really hard choice to change your career and go in there to help people.
It's so funny you ask that, because I would have people say to me, "Oh my gosh, that is so brave to do that after working in corporate for 25 plus years." And I didn't feel brave about it. It felt like something that I couldn't not do. And I mean, I certainly wasn't reckless about it. I planned a financial runway. No, I'd never been an entrepreneur and started my own business. But I think when you go through such a life-changing experience like I did my husband and I had been married probably 26, 27 years at the time, had two kids together who are now 23 and 28. And being so embedded in what was going on, and to watch him like death by a thousand cuts, with the degeneration of his disease, and how much how much he suffered.
Mm-hmm.
I just felt like it's the least that I can do to share not only my knowledge and business expertise, but my experience as a family member. And I am willing to get up there and share the stories and ideally help the staff and families in being able to better manage this big life transition that they're having. So it wasn't a hard decision. It's hard starting a business, but it wasn't hard to make the decision.
And it's one of those things that I'd love for this just to resonate with our listeners too, is that your passion necessarily wasn't your dream your entire life. And that's okay. Right. So what you're doing now is making a huge difference. But I think there's a lot of pressure on generations that are coming up today that'll say like, hey, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. I've heard a lot of people say that. You didn't know what that was until later in your career. And I feel like a lot of people don't know that and they feel like it's a problem. What would you say to that person?
Well, I mean, here I am in my 50s making a decision to take a completely different career path, for sure. I think in my 20s, my dad was an executive in insurance. I started my career in insurance. I really felt that I was going to follow that corporate career path, and imagine the corner office with the brass nameplate, all of that. And then, life just gave us a big slap upside the head. And I felt like what mattered more to me was to be able to have really impactful conversations with people that they could then choose what they want to do with that experience and the ripple effect of the change that they can make. And I'll give you an example. In my workshops, I'd talk about just a simple idea. When you've admitted a new family and resident into your home, that family member drives away probably in tears. And I remember walking into the kitchen in my home alone into the kitchen where that was my husband's domain. He was the chef of the house, and feeling incredibly alone. And if someone from the home had called me that night to say, Deb, it's so and so from the home. Ty's fine. He's doing great. But that must have been a really hard day for you. How are you feeling? How are you doing? How can we support you?
Mm-hmm.
That would have made the world of difference, that they saw me, they had compassion for me, and would have altered that feeling of being supported. And so by sharing that story, the number of clients that say to me they've implemented that, and what a difference it makes, not only for the family, but when the staff has that level of a conversation. This is not about the clinical care. It's not about the transactional, making sure all the clothes are labeled as for laundry. This is about how are you feeling as a human being, because it's likely that that family is feeling a tremendous amount of guilt, grief, sadness, anger, all of those really complex emotions. And so I wasn't having those conversations at the corporate boardroom table.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I really wanted to be able to experience more of.
Well, it's so interesting because, in healthcare as a whole, everybody goes to work. They're great at what they do. First of all, if I want to say that, thank you for all our healthcare workers out there. But I don't want to use the word desensitized, but you go there and you do your job and you see something every day. And I think it's very easy to get disconnected from the notion that you might be interacting with somebody on what to this point is might be the worst day of their lives every single day.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so what can become routine for folks, and hey, routine happens in everybody's jobs, healthcare, police, whatever you talk about, it becomes routine. I think it just goes a long way, like for what you're saying, even being mindful about that. And is that what you're teaching to people right now and teaching organizations, is to be mindful of that? Walk us down that path.
Yeah, I think it's creating the awareness, and the power of storytelling, and that's what people remember. Because we remember how we're made to feel, right? The whole Maya Angelou quote: "It's not what they say or what you
Absolutely.
think. It's right. It's how you're made to feel." And to let them know that they play a part in that, and it's not through any uh, malice. Of course, it is a busy day, and when they viewed it as another admission that needs to be processed. So it's a bit of a mindset shift, I think, to be able to say you can't get mired in the emotion that the family's going through. That's a pathway to burnout. But you can be showing compassion in that moment, because I really truly believe staff do care about the residents' well-being, and that the families are feeling as comfortable as they can in what I say is a decision that they need to make, but you don't want to make.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
My husband and I never imagined that there would come a day where he would be living in a nursing home and me and the kids would be visiting him there. Right. But then the situation happens, and you need to make the best of it, however that looks for you. On the flip side, with my new book, Now What? Managing the Emotional Journey of Long-Term Care for Families, I also want to share stories with families to be able to help them understand and have some empathy for the care team members who work in the home, to give them a bit of a glimpse as to all the steps that need to occur before that bed becomes available for that new resident.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times they're not aware that probably 48 to 72 hours previously, that home lost a resident, likely through passing, that they really grew to love and care for.
Mm-hmm.
And so both sides, what I talk in the book about this admission anxiety. The family and the resident are feeling very anxious about admission day, but so are the staff, because they don't know the family that they're getting. And some families can be really challenging to work with effectively because of whatever is going on for them in their life.
Mm-hmm.
So it really is, I see it very much as a two-way street. This is not just about everything that the home needs to do to provide the best level of customer service. A lot of the breakdown happens with unmet expectations. And a lot of the unmet expectations is because they were never clarified to begin with. So in my book, I list 20 different misconceptions that families typically have and bring out the things that maybe it's hard for staff to even raise with families, so that it helps to provide that. I kind of call it the heavy lifting of education with families, because most, I think, as you mentioned earlier, have no idea what to expect. They likely have never stepped into a long-term care home before and never imagined that they would need to.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
Yeah.
And unless you're thrown into that situation, it's not something people want to think about. It's painful to think about, quite frankly, right?
Yeah. How do you
Any
overcome the stigma that long-term care or assisted living has when it comes to um, whether somebody sees a YouTube clip or a video clip of some undercover camera and the patient is not getting good care or they're being abused. You see something like that one time and it's a stigma as a family member that sticks with you for a long time, and you're going to apply that to every long-term care facility that you think about. And then all of a sudden you're in this situation. How do you help the families overcome if they come in with those types of thoughts that their family members not going to get the care that they should be getting?
I think it starts with the family really educating themselves with what the options are that are available to them in their community, going
Mhm.
in and visiting. And I think right now those are probably done more virtually. Uh, Talking to friends and family or people in the community with the experiences that they have had. Certainly, those awful, horrible situations have happened. Uh, in my experience with three different family members, I never experienced that, or with the homes where
Mhm.
my loved ones were living in. But it's like anything else, you have to do your due diligence. And also, I think understanding that it is typically a suboptimal experience to be having, because it's not something that you ideally want to choose.
Right.
It's
Yeah,
out of
that makes sense.
necessity. And so, and it's also understanding that you're moving into a community living environment where there could be 150 residents that are living in a community setting, and understanding that laundry can get lost, or they may have some staffing challenges. And
Mhm.
certainly the negative media doesn't help as far as trying to attract people to that sector. But I think it's a matter of building the relationship and knowing that if you have a concern, the best way to be able to deal with that, what are your options as far as getting that taken care of? And that's where it's so important to bring this relational approach to it. They're not going to get everything right all the time. It's just, it's
Yeah.
difficult, if not impossible, to be able to tick all the boxes off the list.
Right.
But you have to be able to have that ability to speak openly. And also, I think families, if they have the intent to be a partner in care,
Mhm.
and what that looks like, sometimes it's hard for families to release that primary care role that they've had for so many years, and yet they're hanging on, white knuckling it.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I can see, especially how important this is, because now I'm speaking from what I've seen in the United States, right? And what I think a lot of the maybe some listeners know, maybe they don't, but once people get to this point in their journey of life, a lot of times there is not a ton of cash left in the family on the person going into the home or the
Mhm.
family side. A majority of what I've worked with are Medicaid reimbursed homes in the United States. And where my mind is immediately going is how important this is when that family member or the resident doesn't even have a choice as to where they're going, right? Because they are being told where they have to. I mean, you kind of have a choice, but not really. If you want to be close to where your family live, it's what are you going to do? Right? You have
Mhm.
to go to that place. So now that choice is kind of removed from them as to where to go. So with what you're doing and teaching them how to handle this, I can see being incredibly important, because the relationship between the home and the family member, especially, and the resident, could unravel very quickly without that.
what could really set it unraveling quickly is the lack of communication.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we certainly saw that early on in the pandemic, where families were not being told or they couldn't get information about what was happening. And as human beings, we've got this lovely thing called a negativity bias. And so if there's a gap in knowledge, we tend to spiral down that negative slope.
Mm-hmm.
And imagine all the worst case scenarios that are happening. And where I've seen in working with my clients in Canada, the homes that were very early on communicating regularly, it may have been the same message every day, but that they were sharing what they knew, what they could to keep the families informed. It's not like the families were going, well, we're really happy with how things are going, but at least they knew.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes it's the whole, we can't just focus on telling people what they want to hear.
Right.
Sometimes, again, we are in a suboptimal situation in the middle of a pandemic. And so when a home goes into outbreak and they have to be doing tray service rather than eating in the dining room, of course, that's not ideal. But we all have to adjust our expectations in a situation where we're dealing with a pandemic that has all sorts of uncertainty associated with it.
You're
Yeah.
absolutely right. I have a question, and I want to take this back. So I want to take us back to where you said you came back to the kitchen, right? You put your husband in a home, you come back to the kitchen, that was his domain. But now when you come back to that kitchen, Deb Bakti now is in that kitchen. What do you say to your younger self that day after all you know right now?
Everything's going to be okay. And you did the best job you could in, wow, you're going to make me cry.
Oh,
It's not
Uh,
my goal.
in raising our kids
mhm.
without him, and that they've grown up to be incredibly amazing human beings.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
awesome. Thank you for
Deb,
sharing that.
yeah, thank you. You're gonna make me
Yeah.
cry.
Mm. You know,
Yeah. I mean,
there's, go ahead.
I was just going to say for, for kids who lose a parent, it's hard for us to understand. I mean, I lost my parents, but they were in their 80s. And for kids to lose a parent, we've heard about the post-traumatic stress disorder and post-traumatic growth. And I think the other thing that I've recognized, that by me choosing to take a post-traumatic growth mindset with this whole experience, I think it's actually influenced my kids to see what positive can come out of a tragedy as well.
Mhm.
Wow. And for listeners out there, I mean, this is something that you should be talking about and reaching out for people with help for this. It's not taboo in any way. It's not something where it's just time to find that inner strength and power through. This might be time in your life where you actually where it's okay to be emotional and think about that. And for the listeners, I hope maybe they can do the reverse and think about themselves later on in life and advice that they'd give to themselves,
Mhm.
in
I,
that kitchen too.
for sure. I think it's important for everybody listening to truly home in on what Deb is talking about, and whether your trauma or your experience is long-term care, or your company's going through hard times. When you talk about setting expectations, communicating, um, all of these types of things, those are powerful things. Reaching out to people after a long hard day can prove to be a very strong, um, good way to balance their emotions and let let them know that there are people out there thinking about them and want them to be okay, and that everything's going to be okay. And Luke, I come back to, I experienced this, and we talked, not to take this to the military front, but this kind of structure that Deb's talking about, that now she's providing to all of her clients and bringing into this community, uh, it exists, and there's a strong structure there in the military through what was put in place in family readiness groups, wherein, when service members deploy to combat, there's a traumatic experience happening inside the family. They don't know, number one, when the person's going to come back, if they're going to come back, they're going into danger. Um, and then they watch their loved one get on a plane or a bus and they're gone. So there is no facility for them to go visit them. That's not going to happen. They're not going to see them again until they actually come home. But there's this group of people who are other family members, and they've been trained, and it's that immediate support structure for the family that exists because they are now experiencing a traumatic and very emotional period of time. It's amazing to me that, what Deb's doing in long-term care, what the military has solved in family readiness groups and keeping people informed, communicated with, emotional help, counseling, therapy, whatever, support, that stuff like that's not like just profound across every industry. And we know that it's not, right? That came out when the pandemic hit, and all of a sudden everybody's in crisis. And, the vast majority of companies don't know how to deal with it.
Mm-mm.
So my tirade over.
That was a good tirade, Bo.
I like how you expressed it. I just wrote it down, the family readiness, because one of the things that some of my clients have done is to assign a family ambassador.
Mhm.
So a family member who's been around for a while and knows the ropes and knows the home and things like that, and can help with the onboarding of the new family. And it very
Yeah.
much sounds like what you've just described that the military have had in place.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. So, very profound in overseas locations, where everybody's, you're like expatriates, and now you're living in these foreign countries, and you got your kids, and everybody's got to go to school. So a family member who maybe has been there for a couple of years, or they're more senior, they'll usually volunteer to take on that ambassador type of role for other new families or people coming in. And it's been in existence. So it just rotates, and it's well known, and it's truly a fascinating thing to see. And it really gives even the service member a level of comfort where that somebody's watching out for your family while you're deployed or you're away, right? That there's services, there's structure, there's people for them to talk to. They're not alone in a foreign country wondering, oh my gosh, not just are they experiencing their loved one going away and not knowing what's going to happen, but they're sitting in a foreign country and away from their immediate family back in the US. It's just, the emotional trauma can be profound. So I think where the military hit a home run was creating these family readiness groups that really were put in place for exactly what you're talking about. To communicate, set expectations, be of support and structure, make the phone calls, check on people, all of those types of things. Yeah.
I think in that too, you're acknowledging that there is an emotional journey
Mm-hmm.
that they're going to be going through, versus sometimes it's you just have to suck it up or keep a brave face on for the person, whether it be the person who is being deployed or the resident that's being admitted, that we got to keep a brave face on for them.
Yeah.
And that can end up really creating some emotional deterioration while you're trying to keep that game face on.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yep, for sure.
Emotional deterioration is a great way to put it.
Yep, absolutely.
Great way to put it. Well, Deb, please tell people before we let you go, you need to tell people how they can get a hold of you. Your passion is coming through with this, so I can imagine that people want to reach out. Tell them where to go, your website, how they can get in touch with you so that they can get some help as well, both, on the home side and individual side as well.
Yeah, the best place to find me is my website, which is deborahbakti.com. And it's DeborahBakti.com. And you could also, there's the Kindle version of Now What that's available on Amazon. And I'm starting to record the audiobook next week.
Nice.
Yes.
Yeah.
Super good. That's great.
Well, Deb, you are awesome. It's been a pleasure to have you on here. You're doing a great thing. It's even cooler to see you doing it later on in your career once you've, learned business lessons. And I think it's making you very, very, very effective at what you do. And you can feel the passion behind it. And I think, thank you for being on here.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a great conversation.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Bo and Luke Show, that's a wrap.
Tune in for a new episode every Thursday. You can subscribe to our email newsletter for information on upcoming guests, giveaways, and more. Rate, review, and subscribe. Thank you to our sponsor, Sound United, for quality broadcast audio throughout Season 2.